Now, a report by on Africa and the Choice Architects on the low and middle income market has revealed that many South Africans would rather buy a generator or a battery instead of a car. This is in the midst of the power outages that people are faced with. The findings show that despite age or income, there is a high percentage of respondents who want to purchase backup power sources in the future. For more on this, we're joined now by Wayne McCurrie from Wealth and Investments at FNB. Very good afternoon to you, Wayne. Thank you so much for your time. According to this African Bank Consumer Research report on the low and middle income market, between 40 and 47% of respondents are looking at purchasing backup power sources as opposed to a car. What do these figures tell us about how ordinary South Africans are prioritizing their needs?
Well, look, it's quite clear that the power situation in South Africa is probably the second biggest social and economic challenge that we've had in the last 30 years. Obviously, the biggest one was COVID. But, up until December, we sort of coped with it. Stage 2, every 2-3 times a month. It wasn't too bad. You sort of like said, okay, this is manageable. But certainly since the beginning of December, when we get, I think we've had 2 days off without load shedding since December, and stage 4, 5, 6, it's just crippling both economically and socially. So people are prioritizing their expenditure plans, and they want to buy an inverter with a battery or get a generator, because 2 hours without power a day is okay, but 8 hours without power a day is just unacceptable to people, and they're now starting to buy it. And I actually think that the amount of money that's being spent by individuals and companies to cope with the power crisis is actually enormous, but it's much smaller than the amount of money that's being spent and going to be spent on actually generating electricity on a very, very large scale. This is truly the new growth industry in South Africa, and it's going to be like this for the next, 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely. Looking at other stats, what we have seen is that new vehicle sales in South Africa took a bit of a downturn in March compared with the same month last year, mostly affected by high interest rates. Is this decline a strong enough indication of the economic headwinds, or perhaps a barometer of the health of the domestic economy?
Yes, definitely. But you must remember, this is all cyclical. We had interest rates plummeted after COVID and stayed low for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, over the last year and a half or so, we've had higher inflation here and overseas, and interest rates have gone up quite materially. Certainly in South Africa, the interest rates and the inflation that we've seen is not that abnormal. But overseas in America and in Europe, etc., inflation there is at 40-year highs, if not 60-year highs. So the effect on overseas economies is far more dramatic. But of course, we're affected by that because we export to those countries. South Africa is a very large commodity exporter, and because of the slowdown in economic growth on the back of higher inflation and higher interest rates, commodity prices have actually fallen quite sharply, and that's affected us, and the rand's weaker because of that. But all of this is cyclical. It is very, very likely that by the end of this year, beginning of next year, interest rates will be cut again as inflation falls, and then the economy will start to revive a little bit and new car sales will revive. But of course, our economy is never really going to get going until we resolve many, many issues in South Africa. But foremost and the biggest of all is the power crisis that we're in now.
Yes, because this very same power crisis, according to the report, nearly all youth at 94% and roughly 80% of adults are now planning to study further to broaden their employment opportunities. Load shedding has been cited as a major challenge, preventing them from studying further this year. The impact of load shedding is now impacting people's future advancement in terms of educating themselves.
Well, look, as I said earlier on, when you had 2-3 hours without electricity a day, you just managed around it. You could still do essentially all you wanted to do. But when you have power off from 8 until 12 and then from 4 until 8, that's your day gone. You haven't really got the time to do it. And of course, unfortunately, Not everyone can afford an inverter. Not everyone can afford a generator to give you power. And there's nothing more disheartening that, I mean, I think it's very admirable that such an incredibly high percentage of the population wants to better themselves through education. But how do you do it when you haven't got electricity? You know, it's impossible. You can't even cook your food, let alone study properly. So this challenge is all-encompassing. There is good news, though. I mean, understand now that the private sector is allowed to generate, you know, essentially any amount of electricity that they want to. It might take 3 years, but in the not too distant future, we probably have surplus electricity, and the prices might even come down, surprisingly enough, because of competition in the supply of electricity. So this winter will probably be the worst because we've had that very unfortunate chimney collapse at one of our biggest power stations. And secondly, the one unit at Coburg has been taken off to extend the lifespan. So it is exaggerated at the moment. So I doubt whether we're going to have stage 6 load shedding for the next 3 years, but certainly for the next 6 months, we probably are going to average stage 4, 5, 6 load shedding.
Backup power sources don't come cheap. I mean, they may come down a little later, but with a lot of people looking and really comparing a backup power source as opposed to a car, that also talks to some financing which may be required from the banks. How open are the banks in loaning this money?
The banks are very open to this, and it certainly is the growth area. Maybe not so much individuals, although lots of people are starting to offer packages. You know, you can get yourself a package for your house, I don't know, depending, if you just want the internet and a few lights, you know, you can get a package. You can probably get something that's adequate for, I don't know, 15, 20,000. If you want to go fully off-grid, it's probably 400, 500,000. So then it really is expensive. But there are going to be numerous packages. You're probably going to be able to rent it. You don't have to buy it. I mean, this, as I've said earlier on, is the new growth industry in South Africa. And just as far as the banks are concerned, the banks are currently financing these mega projects that's being done by essentially every big company in South Africa is making a plan either to buy electricity from other suppliers, or if you're really big, to actually go into the large-scale generation of power, you know, as a standalone unit and just connect to the grid. Bank loans in this area is big. I mean, this will, I don't know, I mean, no one will actually know the total amount, but I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 3 to 5 years there's over R1 trillion being spent on power generation. I mean, the numbers are actually enormous. So when you look at the economy, and we all know the state that the economy is in, given high interest rates, etc., bank loans are still growing at double digit, and the reason for that growth is financing of power generation and also financing to a lesser extent, you and I at our houses putting in some sort of alternative to load shedding. So this is actually reasonably good for loan creation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks for those interesting developments. Wayne McCurrie from Wealth and Investments at First National Bank, speaking about the options when it comes to backup power sources.